camera it is, basically. This is kind of a recreational camera.
No, this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would always prefer to start with that. We won't have it's only going to be 3 hours. We may also want to project how we build actually stuff. Perhaps you crisis
Yeah, I know that.
Basically, yeah.
He said he was going to try and
You met him before? Yeah, we told
So what can we try?
I managed the training services, so like the systems group.
So we'll be
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good start.
We all sit on your side? You're ready to go? Okay.
No. We're not working as close. Somewhere else. Good course. Yeah. This about feature collaboration. If you get it now, you just play the extra or whatever.
I know. All I do is like 60 miles an hour. On the way back.
Yeah.
I already got the time to go.
Yeah.
Everyone? Ask everyone to take your seats. Well, if you're here, then chances are you're here for the Colocation SFO vendors meeting for solicitation OPM SFO-IN-2008-2, which I'm sure you've all memorized, so you know where you are. My name is Chris Willey. I'm Deputy CTO of Infrastructure Services for Octo with the district. We'll start with some introductions, and then we have some opening remarks, but we want to reserve the majority of the time for your questions and make sure that we answer them. So without further ado, we'll start on my right.
I'm Sandra Misra, and I'm with the General Counsel's Office for the Office of Property Management. So I will assist any legal questions that come up in the process.
And I am Todd Douglas, the Realty Officer for the Office of Property Management. And just real quickly, Office of Property Management, of course, is responsible for leasing, and this will be a lease. However, of course, Octo is our client agency and with all the technical knowledge. So again, we're here to make sure your questions are answered.
I'm Glenn Carter. I'm with Octo. I'm the Director of Networking and Telecommunications.
Glenn Mincher with Octo, the Director of the Data Centers. And I'm Mark Newman, Manager of Mainframe Services.
And on my left,
John Profit, Project Manager with Octo.
Lee Scott, Director of Network Engineering Services.
and over on the side,
Rector Diaz, Project Manager for Orville.
Regina Payton, Legal Specialist with the Office of Property Management.
I'm Dan Bridges. I'm a contractor for infrastructure services.
now I'd like to do the introductions from the vendor community. Please state your full name and the company that you represent. We'll start on my right, past Mark.
George Cooper, IT Server Center.
Quentin Reynolds, IT Server Center.
Nathan Bishop, Presidio Network Solutions.
Jonathan Litvin, CRG West. Christopher Lynch, NTT America's Enterprise Hosting.
Jeanette Bellamy, IBM Corporation.
I'm sorry, the gentleman on your left and right.
Christopher Boyd, NTT America.
Toshiro Shimada, NTT America.
Soraya Baker, Verizon.
Lars Borg, Verizon.
Yerba Kalik, Verizon.
Emmett Tidings, ABT, Quest Partner. Ron Newcomer, Quest. Damian Whittam, Terramark.
Bob Lutz with ACS.
Rodney Brown on behalf of Terramark.
Rajan Natarajan, Cantech.
The gentleman that just joined us.
Ken Pittman, Vantix.
All right, thank you. So just a few administrative points. Actually, before I do that, just have OPM, if you have any opening remarks.
So OPM is the Office of Property Management for the District of Columbia, and we serve as, you could think of us as almost a broker acting on the behalf of other agencies for the district. And in this case, our client is the Office of the Chief Technology Office, which is represented here today by Chris. And they have a need, obviously, for a data center, or space within a data center. So our role in that is to help them prepare what their needs are, draw up specifications that could go out to a community of providers so that you understand what kind of leasing needs we have. We would then be involved. Once offers are received, we'll help facilitate going through, making sure that offers are responsive and meet the specifications. We'll assist OCTO as they need to develop a short list. At the end of the day, when someone is actually picked and there's a lease that's awarded, the Office of Property Management will be the one that actually negotiates the lease with the lessor and goes through to the conclusion of that. The document is actually signed by the Director of the Office of Property Management with whoever happens to be the lessor who's chosen in this process. So we are here to answer any questions you might have really about the leasing aspects, not so much the technical specifications, but more to do with maybe rental rates or the OPM forms that you saw as part of the solicitation package. And then we will defer to OCTO with regard to any of your technical questions as to the specs that are being requested.
And let me just say it's going to be very important, because we're working very closely with OCTO, that whatever questions you have, that you email them to us. And if there's a little delay in response, because we're coordinating with the experts at OCTO to make sure we get the appropriate question, because this is highly technical, obviously. That's basically it.
And with the gentleman who just joined us, please introduce yourself.
Gregory Cotton, Chief Information Officer for OPM.
All right, very good. So just a few administrative points. First of all, make sure that all of you have signed in when you came in. There was a sign-in sheet when you walked in. That sign-in sheet will be scanned and posted online. We have a wiki site that we will be setting up, and the link will be available on the solicitation page, and it will be emailed to each of you as well. We'll be posting written comments. We'll be posting any additional documents in conjunction with OPM. Sort of a place for us to keep track of all of the administrative areas of the solicitation. It'll also sort of give you a countdown so you can see how many days left before the proposal deadline, which, by the way, has moved. So if you have not already received that information, I actually think the solicitation package that you would download right now has the old date. The new date for proposal submission is the 8th of December at 2 p.m., I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
2 p.m. And that is a hard and fast. Anything received at 2:01 p.m. will not be accepted. And are we? Is it only mail-in or is it electronic?
It's mail-in.
Usually take hard copies, and
Okay. And that information is on the solicitation as well?
it is.
Okay.
And the number of applications that you have to submit.
Will they be accepted at the bid room counter?
Sorry.
Will they be accepted at the bid room counter?
No, it'll come up to the OPM.
The address is posted on the website, so you should check there, but it should go to the address that's actually listed on the website because it's our office that is switching it down the bid.
Okay, so, any other questions on specifically on the submission process? Okay. Could the gentleman who just joined us please introduce himself? Just your name and the company.
John President, gentleman, MSID.
Thank you. And it looks like we have one more. Okay, as you may have noticed, we're recording this meeting as well. We have a videographer over here to my right, and this video will be posted on YouTube as well as on the wiki site that I mentioned earlier. As you may have guessed, Octo is very interested in transparency, so we're making sure everything's available online to the public, not just for the folks here, but for anybody who cares to download it. We have mics at each of your places for questions, so if you do ask any questions, we ask that you please use the microphone so that it can be recorded on the video, as well as everybody can hear you. Want to make a distinction between what's said here in this room versus what is submitted as written questions. This is a discussion meeting today, so there's nothing that's binding on the district with regard to what is said in this meeting. If you do want to get an official response on any questions, you must submit them in writing. We're asking that you do so electronically, and Todd Douglas is the recipient of that. And Todd, can you just give everybody your email address?
The email address is todd, T-O-D-D, .douglas@dc.gov, and it'll get directly to me.
And we will do our best to turn around answers to questions within 24 hours of the next business day. So submit them early and submit often. I mentioned the proposal date change, so actually I think those are all of my administrative items. They're on our agenda. We have overview of the Colocation SFO, but I'm actually going to bypass that. I'm assuming that folks have read it by now. But obviously, if you have questions about specific things, we will be happy to answer them. And the floor is open. So we will just, if you wish to ask a question, just raise your hand and I will recognize you. And when you, I'm sorry, I know you're ready to, but when you do, please just once again reintroduce yourself and ask your question. Thank you. Sir?
Ken Pittman from Vantix. I have one question in regards to submission requirements. The RFP requests an original +7. Are you requesting any electronic submissions along with the hard copies?
We have indicated in here one electronic copy, so you can submit a CD along with it.
Just you will accept a CD in addition to handouts or in addition to printed, or?
Section C1 of the solicitation specifies that we'll take 7 written copies plus 1 electronic copy. CDs are preferred.
Sir?
Ron Newcomer, Plus Communications. How did you want the CLI and subtotal done? It appears as though it could be quite a few different iterations and provide different results. So we're honestly a little bit confused about that Appendix C pricing.
Yeah, it's I agree that the format is not it's not the best. This was something that we did with our procurement office. What I would say is do your best to sum the different items. You're not required to fill out every line. It's only the things that you're wishing to provide pricing for that you offer. For example, if you, let's just take the first page, cabinet non-recurring charge. We're asking for, per cabinet, what would be the charge if you were to rent that cabinet to us? What is the unit price and therefore the total amount, which in this case would be times 1. And then the subtotal would be the total of all of those things based on the quantity that you chose to include. And this is not it is not required that you submit. I don't believe that it is required that you submit this pricing because these are additional services or equipment that you may wish to say, here are our prices for these things. But the price of the space is I believe I'm correct in saying that the price for the space is separate from this. Is that accurate? Or is that how you want them to submit it?
Well, you know, what we have here is for the space itself. So I'd say there are two types of charges that are shown on the pricing sheet. One is, as Chris stated, are additional services, additional equipment that might be provided, and then of course there's just the base sort of cost for the space. In order for Octo to really understand what their needs are to get the best pricing, we've asked for, given the strong room space, you'll see here the colocation space, to be provided for a variety of sizes, for a range of sizes. That's so that we can just evaluate all of them at the same time. For those pieces where it's actually about the lease space, that is necessary. You have to fill in those areas of the pricing sheet. If you move past that towards hourly administrative services, additional power, those types of items, those are not in the basic specs, and so you would fill those in as you want to.
Right. So my statement was incorrect. If you look at the first part of the solicitation, for those who brought it with you on page 3, part of the requirements are completion of the fixed price schedule as attached in Appendix C. So if you wanted to submit, for example, under colocation space monthly, we have different brackets because we're looking to understand your pricing structure. So at what point do you give price breaks for more space, if you will? And that's why we have different brackets. So obviously, if you chose to fill out 5,000, 5,500, 6,000, and so on, the subtotal would be difficult because you can't sum all those things because that doesn't present an accurate picture of it. So what I would say is, again, do your best on the subtotal and perhaps put in a note that just indicates how you calculated the subtotal. We can obviously go through and subtotal it ourselves based on what we choose to break out from your pricing sheet. The main thing is that we're just trying to get an understanding of how you price your services. Do you have follow-up?
May I follow up?
Yes.
Again, Ron Newcomer from Quest. I just want to make sure I fully understand. I believe we're on the same wavelength. I'm specifically talking about an item that says subtotal, CLIN 0001, Appendix C, page 3 of 3.
Correct. Yeah, that's the subtotal I'm referring to as well.
So you're just saying do your best, and
Exactly.
there's going to be variables.
Right.
Or put a note annotated with
Yeah, I would put at the bottom of this sheet, sort of below where it says grand total base year, I would just put in a note that says subtotal calculated as follows, or something like that. That would give us an understanding. And obviously, if we have questions about your pricing, we'll ask you. So we'll do our best to come to an understanding.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Damian Whittam from Terramark. The first question I have is, the format that you provided this in is obviously in a PDF format. It looks like it's a Word document. Would you mind if we resubmit in an Excel format?
We could probably post an Excel version of the, why don't we do that? We'll post an Excel, at the end of the day today, we'll post an Excel version of this pricing sheet so that you can fill it out.
Okay. Then the second question I have is, under the data center technical services, you break out two categories. You have administration and you have technical services. Can you please define exactly what those are?
Can you direct us to where?
Yes, page 3 of Appendix C.
Appendix C. Page 3 of Appendix C, the data center edition.
Page 2 of Appendix 3. Page 2 of 3, Appendix C.
Hourly, oh, I see. Technical services. Let's see, good question. I would say that technical services would be like remote hands. So if you have a technician on site who can provide rebooting of servers, or perhaps more higher order technical services like backup or patch installs or that kind of thing. Administrative would be more receiving of things on the loading dock. It would be potentially providing documentation of whatever, maybe security reports or that kind of a thing. So that would be how I would distinguish between. So technical would really be somebody who has technical experience and is doing technical duties. Administrative would be sort of more of those other things, either on-site or remotely, that would be other support services.
Thank you.
questions? Yes?
In the spirit of not creating a necessarily elaborate proposal, when we respond to this, would you prefer that we include additional technical detail in appendices, or when actually responding to the specific section that we're responding to?
Sure. Can you just repeat your name and company, please?
Christopher Boyd, NTT America. Thank you.
Yes, if you want to submit additional material via appendices, you may. Did we give an upper page limit on the? Okay, so there is no limit on the appendices, but the more you give us, the harder it will be for us to read it all. So do you have a specific thing in mind that you were?
What I meant is that when we're responding to the actual specific section of the proposal, simply stating compliance in a paragraph with a summary detail, do you want that additional material explaining in depth the compliance in an appendice format, or do you want it in the response to the question?
I think it's easier for readers to have it in an appendix format with a reference. Personally, I would appreciate that kind of a structure. It would make it easier for me to follow. And can the two gentlemen who just entered please introduce themselves?
Yes, Michael Arm from Powerlaw.
Okay.
Bart Rogers with Carpathia.
Thank you. We're in the Q&A portion now, so your time is up.
One more comment on Appendix C. As you can see in the submission requirements, we want you to calculate the 5-year and the 10-year. We need to see both of those.
That's a good point. So if you, looking at the first page, the overview of the first section of the solicitation, we're referring to that second middle paragraph there. We're looking for options. One option would be a 5-year term with 2 5-year options, and the other option is a 1 10-year term. Yes?
Damian Whittam with Terramark again. The question I have is on page 6 of Appendix A, and this has to do with the power calculations. The numbers that are given, if you take the high end of 8 kilowatts per rack over 200 racks, and you calculate that out, it's a lot more than 500 kilowatts. What number should we use as a general guideline so we can kind of level the playing field for everybody? Because there's a big difference between 500 kilowatts and say like 1.5 megawatts of power.
That's a good point. Not to quote from the solicitation, but essentially what we're saying is that what we expect to move in with is between, I would say between, if we say between 300 and 350 kilowatt, but I actually think it's probably between 300 and 500 kilowatts. That's what we plan to move in with. But what we're asking is for the folks that are responding to let us know about their capacity to provide X amount of power. So what is your upper limit, in other words, or how well do you scale? So if we had to if we went up to a megawatt, what would be how would we do that? How would you price it? How could you prepare it? Is it going to be a 6-month wait while you get the associated equipment in? That type of thing. So it's more your capacity to provide power. Hey, Asha, can you introduce yourself?
Oh. Hi, Asha Arlakshmi, Director of TechStat Octo.
Yes.
John Linfany, CRG West. I noticed in the actual document, it states 2N. Can you share the importance and depth you want to take that 2N out to? Are you looking for separate power grids? Are you looking for just separate substations? How deep do you want to go in this Tier 3, Tier 4 type of environment?
We'd like to know how deep you go. So when responding to 2N or N+1 or whatever I believe we did say 2N, let us know to what degree you meet that, and that would include to the substation and the power grid. Yes. Other questions? Yes.
Again, John Linfany, CRG West. I noticed the full service stipulation in the document as far as the co-location data center space. Are you looking for the full service as well on the office side, or is that going to be more of a traditional office lease separate from the agreement? I'd imagine you want these facilities adjacent to each other to leverage what you're doing.
Yes. Let me see. Can you reference the full service from the? I think I know what you're referring to, but I just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
Yeah, as opposed to a triple net lease in real estate terms. It states you were looking for a full service.
We would like to have it full service. And it would be, I think the preference is to have the office space included with the technical space or the data space, or at least in proximity to that. And we prefer a full service statement of the rent, and we understand that sometimes the landlords, even in our commercial deals, will, in their own calculations, run the rent however they want to run the rent, and then they'll restructure it into a full service, into a flat full service rate. For our purposes, it helps in our budgeting and internal lease monitoring and enforcement.
I understand certain people around the table offer different varying flavors of that, and I just wanted to understand for all of us which way you would like to see it, so we can all compare.
Right. And that is definitely our preference, is that it's full service on both components, and then both be treated similarly.
And is that understandably net electric or including the electric?
Including the electric.
Oh. Okay.
Yes.
Damien Wood with Terramark. The question I have about the office space is when you say fully managed or fully loaded, what are the technical requirements you're going to need? For example, connectivity, availability, etc. Can you go into greater detail, please?
I suppose, not to be flip, but essentially all the things that we would need to be able to work on with internet connectivity, VPN connectivity to the data center floor, phones, power, and space to work. So not necessarily looking for a conference room space, for example, but basically if I have technicians going out to the site, that they have a place to plug in and do what they need to do.
So what you're saying is like a test area, workbench, that kind of thing?
I think that if you offer workbench services, we'd like to see that, but the spirit of the office space was more a place for somebody to work. But we should also see, and actually I think there was a mention of crash carts in there as well in the price sheet, if I remember correctly. I may be wrong about that. But we would like to know the capacity of that space. And also if you have separate space that is more for technical builds, that may be more not in the office space but in another space, we want to know about that as well. But I think the spirit of that is if a technician comes in and needs to work on a piece of equipment that they can
Ron Newcomer with Quest. I'm not very attuned to DC government budgeting, but has the funds been approved, allocated, or whatever the terminology is for this particular project?
Yeah, I'm sorry, can you repeat the first part of your question?
Well, that was just an introduction, the first part was. I don't understand the DC government appropriations. My question is, has the funding been applied? Is the funding there for this particular project?
I see. Yes, we have encumbered capital funds for this project, yes.
That's my question.
Okay. Sorry. I was thinking it was more detailed.
Much more succinct than I put it.
It's John Lippany, CRT West. I just want to clarify a little further on the 2N requirement. There's a contrary sort of statement here in A8.1.3 versus A9.3. You're looking for a facility based on N+1, but then you also get on the system load in A8.1.3, the overall electrical system shall be 2N redundant. That's a big cost factor, considering most suppliers for data center space and colocation only supply N+1 on a standard basis with a tier 2 environment. Of course, you can double that and attain tier 4 if your facility can support it. But what do you want here? Are you looking for double the facility in that 2N? Or are you just looking for N+1 and that's what you really want? We'll price it at that.
That's a good question. Dan, do you want to address any part of that? Do you recall that piece of the solicitation?
No, I think we'll wait until we get it in writing.
Right. I think it would be best if you submit that question in writing because it might be good for all the folks to kind of get that. But I think as a general sort of spirit of the solicitation again response, we're looking for the ability of the facility from an electrical standpoint essentially to be doubly redundant, but then the systems within the service our equipment more directly looking at N+1 if that makes sense. We can get you a more technical answer in writing, but I think that's the spirit of what we're looking for. Yes.
Christopher Boyd, NTG America. On A13.5, where you talk about the recorded camera data being made accessible to the district for district-controlled areas, does that include the office space as well, or is that just for the colocation space?
Good question. I had not thought of that, and we would actually like it for the office space, but I had not considered that. We didn't specifically say that. So we'd like to know what your cameras record, whether it is the office space or the data center space. Thank you.
Do you have a preference?
Sorry.
Quentin Reynolds from IT Service, do you have a preference to have cameras in both? Would you prefer, is that the district's preference?
Let me take that back. I don't know that it's strong enough to call it a preference, because that implies scoring and that kind of thing. So I would say that we'd like to know where your cameras record. Are we going to score that differently? Since we hadn't thought about it before just a second, I kind of doubt it. But if you want to get an official response in writing, you can certainly respond in writing. Just making a note of that here. Yes.
John Lidman again. Can you stress the importance of the carrier neutrality, what you're looking for here?
Can you be more specific?
I'd just like to understand, it lists 3 Tier 1 providers in a facility. Are you looking to go further than that? Is there a certain amount of providers you're looking for? And how neutral are you looking for? Are you looking for someone to say, we're a proprietary facility that will allow a secondary provider to come in to back you up? Or are you looking for a fully neutral multi-tenant facility?
Our preference is for fully neutral, but for the simple reason that we want options. Not just options when we sign the lease, but also options down the road if we need to change. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question or not. If we need to get more technical, I can defer to some of my networking folks.
I could go sideline on that. Yes.
House from Viewtrust Technology. In terms of the connectivity to the existing centers and this new center, that's not specified throughout the document. So I guess that's a separate acquisition that you're planning to do, and in the context of evaluation of this center space, would you be looking at sort of bandwidth being available on day one?
Good question. The bandwidth will be a separate solicitation. We'll be putting out an RFP for that. We obviously couldn't put it out until we knew where we were going, but we expect that will hit the street on the day that we sign the lease with this colocation provider.
Is there an expectation in terms of sort of minimum bandwidth that's available with these multiple carriers that need to be available as an option for you?
That will be specified in the bandwidth RFP.
Michael Arm from Powerloft. I apologize, this question may have been asked, I came in late. You talk in more than one section about for UPS requirements, including on-site battery. Will you accept rotary plywood?
Yes.
Bob Lids with ACS. Chris, you mentioned a separate RFP for bandwidth solicitation with regard to your overall planning for the 2 data centers. Can you give maybe some visibility or the current viewpoint about different procurements that might be related to this and how you see them kind of fitting together so the overall task is accomplished?
Sure. I've said to numerous people that the way we've sort of broken this out, as opposed to trying to do one massive solicitation for everything associated with the data center relocation. So what you're looking at today is the space that we want to co-locate in outside of the district. The bandwidth, of course, is the other piece to get the connectivity from our fiber network out there. But alongside of that, of course, the reason why we're doing this co-location is that we're moving out of our existing spaces. So obviously the move is another solicitation that we need to do, and that is separate and apart from any of the other solicitations that we have. And those are really the 3. Actually, there's a 4th because we're doing some construction work in an existing government building. That will be our 2nd location. We're actually moving out of both of our existing data centers. I think some of this is addressed in the solicitation, but so I said, if I were to characterize how we're going about this, those are the 4 solicitations that we're doing.
Ron Newcomer Quest. Excuse me, I was writing and I only heard bits and pieces.
Sure.
The bandwidth solicitation is coming right after this solicitation. Is that correct?
We will release it, or the plan is, and it's all based on how fast we can get things out, but the plan is to release it the day of or the day after we sign the lease with the colocation provider, because we want to get that in place as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Yes.
Christopher Boyd, NTT America. For the HVAC requirements, you asking for a consistent temperature of 70 degrees in the data center computing areas. I assume that that's specific to the district space. Also, is that referring to ambient air temperature in the room, or are you referring to the temperature of, let's say, a hot or cold row, specifically in the data center area for the district? What quantitatively do you want measured there, and how do you want that reported?
Ambient temperature in the room and specific to the district. Those are correct statements. How to measure it? We'll be kind of looking to see what you can provide with regard to metering within the space. So we want to know what are your temperature probes. What are your devices that you have for measuring humidity and temperature, and how do you do it? And then we'll evaluate those, because I'm sure that some folks around the table do it differently than others. Yes.
Lars Bohr with Verizon. Going to A16-2, where we're talking about connectivity, and this may have to go to a written question, I'm not sure. But you talk about the Tier 1 providers, access to Tier 1 providers. Clarification, are you looking for facility-based carrier connectivity, or are you just looking for connectivity to Tier 1 providers?
I'm going to give you the non-technical answer, and then I'll ask my guys to maybe give you a more technical answer. But I believe that either would be fine. But let me look at Glenn or Lee to see if you want to respond differently. And you need to repeat the questions.
We would be more interested in Tier 1 providers having facilities inside the colo.
And feel free to ask us that question in writing, and we can get you an official response. Other questions?
Yes. Forgive me, this is John Litney of CRG West. Someone may have already asked this question, but given the dates have pushed back for the bid, is the award date being pushed back as well? Many of us were hoping to have this completed by the end of the year.
Did we specify an award date? No, we did not specify an award date. What I would say is that a lot of it is going to be dependent on the number of proposals we receive. The way that we're doing the evaluation process is sort of a two-stage evaluation. So we're going to look at the written proposals, come up with a group of what we feel are qualified candidates, and then with those qualified candidates, we will be conducting tours of their facilities with a specific checklist that was included in the packet. By the way, that checklist is not necessarily the final version of it. We are still in progress with it, but that is the bulk of it. There may just be some additional things that we add, but we will be providing that checklist in writing to the qualified list of vendors before we conduct the tour. But we are moving on an aggressive schedule, because just like you would like to close this by the end of the year, so would I. However, even after we do the tours and we select a finalist, because of the nature of this procurement, we will have to have council review. And that can be anywhere from 10 to 45 days, depending on how they want to address it. So just given that, we are going to be signing the lease at the beginning of the calendar year, and not forward. I don't think there's any way around that. But in terms of selecting a finalist, I'm hoping that we can do that by the end of the year. Yes?
Ron Newcomer Quest, I'm sure you know that by now. Could I have your definition of a Tier 1 carrier?
With regards to Tier 1 carriers, we're looking for internet providers that have a global presence within the as far as network throughout the nation. So we're looking for the global table, and not a situation where we have to deal with a Tier 2 or Tier 3 we were dealing with sub round tables, etc. And that is, basically that's what we've been doing with working with tier 1 providers since we actually connected the District 2 internet, and basically that's what we are accustomed to dealing with. So tier 2, tier 3, we're really not too much interested in at this point.
Glenn, if you want to.
I was just going to say that's probably the best question to ask in writing, so we can give you a specific definition of what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to put anybody on the spot.
No, that's fine.
Question around the IT Service Center. Two questions. To go back to the N+1 versus 2N, how stringent of a criteria is the 2N requirement? And if a facility is N+1 in certain aspects of its infrastructure, will it be evaluated higher than a facility which is truly 2N throughout all of the lineup of infrastructure that's serving the facility?
So if I understand your second question correctly, would an N+1 compliant, if you will, colocation provider be rated higher than a 2N?
No, just the other way.
Opposite. Okay, I thought I heard, that's what I thought I heard. I'm glad to hear you said it was the opposite. With the requirements in Appendix A, the way we will be evaluating that set of requirements is to what degree you meet them. So in that sense, yes. If somebody was 2N, then that is more attractive to the district than someone who is N+1. However, all of this is in relationship to other factors such as price, such as the risk to facility, what are the characteristics of your facility, and what are the risks that go along with that. So there's nothing that's sort of like, well, I won't say nothing, but there's very little that is sort of like a make or break, if you will. It's all sort of to what degree do you meet the requirements of the district.
Thank you. That was the first question.
That was
the second
right.
question
Right.
is the TIA 942 criteria that you mentioned requires things such as inert gas and other types of infrastructure upgrades. How stringent of a criteria is that?
The TIA 942 is something that can be certified, so you could have somebody go out to your facility and actually say, yes, you are. Unlike the Tier 2 or Tier 3 requirements for like the Uptime Institute, which is sort of more guidelines. So we're going to be looking for, are you certified? Do you actually, can you show in writing that you actually meet those requirements? And that's actually, I think, one of the documentation pieces that we request in Appendix B.
Okay. So, and I mentioned an item which is required within TIA 942, Tier 3,
the inert gas,
which is the inert gas systems. So if a facility does not have inert gas, and there is a facility on the list that does have inert gas, once again, it's a...
Sure. I'm not that conversant in the specifics of the specification, so it'd be hard for me to say right here, right now. If you don't have inert gas, you're out. But we can review that, and if you have specific comments that you want to make in your proposal that say, okay, we don't have inert gas, but here's what we do for fire suppression, then we'll look at that. So it's all relative, if you will. Yes.
How many staff will be used at this facility? How many Opto staff will be manning this facility? Is it a daily basis, weekly basis, remote location?
It is our intention that this will be a lights-out facility. We're looking for hoteling office space so that when we are present, we have a place to work. But it is our intention to have no staff at this particular facility.
Rodney Brown on behalf of Terramar. When you look at the overall picture of the additional migration piece and the construction piece, what impact does the timing of the migration and the build-out have on the execution of the lease and colocation?
We will, when we sign the lease for colocation, we'll have a start date, an effective start date for the commencement of that lease. It is our intention to make that coincide with the efforts that we're doing with regard to the planning of the migration. So The migration services solicitation has not yet been released, but will be soon. So my hope is that we can have as little time that we're paying for space that we're not occupying. We're trying to line those up as best we can, but it's all a moving target. And we recognize that in many cases the colocation provider will need a certain amount of time to prepare the space. So we're assuming that that'll be negotiated as part of the deal.
Quentin Reynolds from IT Server Center. Are you planning on paying for the power that you require, regardless if you're consuming that power? Or, in other words, is it going to be provisioned in a circuit on a circuit by circuit type of basis? Or are we allocating 300, 400, or 500 kW to your space, and we're charging you the appropriate rates that type of allocation would demand?
That's up to you. We want to see, I mean, not to turn it around, but we're looking at, to what degree to meet the requirements with and what is your price. So if you provide power on a block basis, you say here's 300K, here's 500K, whatever, versus, here's 500K, but we're only going to charge you for what you use, we're going to look at both of those and compare them along with everything else to decide what's going to be the right choice for the district. So we don't have a specific preference for one versus the other. However, if you think about it, if you're only charging us for the electricity that we consume, chances are your costs will be lower. But that's not necessarily true when you take everything else into account. So we're looking at everything, and we're not going to discount somebody just because they provide power one way versus another. Does that answer your question?
It does, but if we provision infrastructure to cool 500 kW, then the pricing scheme has got to be different than if I'm provisioning infrastructure to cool 300 kW. So the consumption, what will be the district's real consumption of power? What's the estimated true consumption of power? So that, because from my perspective, I want to get the numbers down as low as I possibly can, and I still want to be able to win the effort, and I want to be able to provide the power that the district needs to cool its infrastructure. So if I charge you for 500 kW, and I price myself out of the game because I'm thinking that you really need 500 kW, and if one of my competitors priced at 100 kW, and they're willing to set aside the space, then I've kind of missed an opportunity that perhaps, if I would have had the same insight, I could have done a lot better.
Here's why I can't give you an exact answer. We estimate right now within the current data center we're drawing about 300 to 350 kW in one of our two data centers. However, in addition to moving one of those data centers out into this colocation space, we're also consolidating data centers within the district. So we will be bringing on additional equipment from other data centers, from other agencies, and we will also be, we're always growing. So we're growing, and we estimate between 10 and 20% a year, probably closer to 10%. And that just means that it's going to be a moving target. Even within the first year of occupying your colocation space, we're going to grow. At the same time, we're doing a lot more with virtualization, which means we're also trying to reduce our physical footprint. So it really is a moving target, and I can give you that's the current information, but it's likely to change as we move forward. Another question? Yes.
Ron Newcomer Quest. On the S101, S102 forms, first they're in PDF format, so I guess they would have to be completed by hand. Is that your intention?
We have not converted it to a fillable PDF at this time, but we'll accept, you can handwrite, and we don't expect you to pull out our fine typewriters, which are difficult to find.
All
So
our
right now, you can
typewriters
do
are
it by
put
hand.
away, right?
We're trying to get it converted so it's just fillable and much easier for
And you won't be looked at differently than somebody else has typed it in. As long as we can read it.
Although I think they do have typewriters in the DC Public Library. So
In fact, secondly, I'm getting a little bit of internal pushback, and I could show you scars on some of the information, which, again, I'm just getting some very serious pushback on. Could we provide some of the information upon an award that they claim is, that we claim internally is so sensitive that we don't want to?
You're referring to the documentation in Appendix B?
The S101, S102 forms.
I guess I'm curious to know what's on those forms in particular that would be sensitive, and most of the information on those two forms are simply, you know, cost for TIs, your estimate of what the rent. I mean,
Can I get a specific?
Can you give an example?
Can I submit it in writing to you, and then I will get the exact, because I'm just a messenger here today. So they needed a pretty face to send, so that's
And I apologize, but I neglected to ask the gentleman who joined us to introduce himself. Sir?
Hi, David Tolson, DBT Data.
Other questions? Yes.
Damien Nguyen with Terramark. With regards to those forms that we were just discussing, I guess the big concern is there is some proprietary, what we consider proprietary information about costs, our costs, and do those documents become public record, or are they withheld?
So all of the district's documents are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. As most people probably know, there are certain exemptions from our disclosure of documents. If it's proprietary information, there's an exemption that has to do with financial information that places someone at a competitive disadvantage in their particular market. So generally what we do for solicitations across the board is if you can identify and state that you feel that this information is exempt under the Freedom of Information Act, then if we do get a FOIA request, we at least assert that there's an exemption that applies to it.
Yes.
Emmett Tidings Quest. So just one more follow-on to that question. How will we know that, will you tell us pre-award that that information is applied to barriers to freedom of information?
Well, I mean, I can't provide legal advice to you directly. So you really need to have your general counsel look at the act. I'm happy to give them the citation, and they can look at the specific exemption and see whether they feel comfortable with whether it applies to that information. I think you're thinking about the operating costs for the entire facility.
Yes.
And I'm happy to have a conversation with your general counsel to see how comfortable we both feel with the ability to not disclose that.
Ron Newcomer again, Quest. Did I hear you say that you would engage in conversation with our counsel?
About this issue, I can certainly.
About that? Okay, how do I contact you?
So my email address, I'm going to have to spell my name because it's long, but for anyone who's interested, is sanjukta.mitra@dc.gov, and that's S as in Sam, A as in Nancy, JUKT as in Tom, A, .misra, which is M as in Mary, I, S as in Sam, RA, @dc.gov. So they can contact me.
I'll get it afterward. I missed a couple of items. I'm not as good as Vanna.
And we can, I can post that also.
Yeah, we could post that.
Thank you.
Yes. Sorry, NCT first and then.
Chris Boyd, NCT America. In your responses to the colocation questions about the strong room that would be walled and it could be partitioned and divided after that, do you have specific requirements around that segmentation or that walling of the strong room? And if you have those requirements, can you make those available? Or is this simply, I'm trying to ascertain from your definition here if this is one large partition and then multiple partitions after that, or if this is a wall locked area with a cage partitioned area in that.
Right. As with many things, we want to know how you provision a strong room. But in terms of the requirements that we have, we characterize strong room separately from a cage in the sense that the strong room has walls and the cage is not. But we want the overall district space to be segregated from other customers within the facility, either by a cage or a strong room. The choice between the two will be based on our level of security requirements as well as the cost. Within that space, we have, and whether it's a cage or a strong room, we have customers that we host that have different security requirements than others. And so we will want to be able to cage off within the cage or within the strong room additional partitions. But I think those will probably be cages and not additional walls within the strong room.
Okay, just to follow up on that is that so in the quotation, we should assume that this is going to be a separate room, and therefore electricity, power, and cooling should be handled from the standpoint that this is not going to be open aired space to other customers. This is going to be dedicated and partitioned off specifically for the district by separate walls.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And yes,
You know, I read in the document also, this is John Litt from CRG West again, section 8.4.1, it breaks down the space that you're currently occupying at ODC1 and ODC2. If you derive and even make some assumptions of density versus how much of that raised floor space you actually use, come up with some low densities, sub 50 watts a square foot. You know, 300 kilowatts today or 500 kilowatts, when you're looking at moving into a newer type facility of 200 watts a square foot, that represents a lot smaller footprint than you occupy today. Are you driving at higher densities? If so, how high do you aim to go through the 10-year growth span of this bid?
hard to predict 10 years, but we are trying to move towards an 8 kW standard for the next 3 to 5, I would say, and we know that that's where we're headed. We can only do that with some of our equipment. You know, there are some pieces of equipment that just are what they are. They're going to draw what they draw, and they take up as much space as they take up. And there are other things that we can consolidate. So right now, yes, our densities are probably within 2 to 5 kW, probably not even 5 kW in the current data center. So we're really trying to consolidate more and tighten that up so that we have more space to work with, especially in the government space that we're going to be occupying.